I can't put aside that it is a crime in your state against someone else in your state that in no way invokes anything the federal government should touch, and yet it's a federal crime.
No, it's just, I mean, it's just crimes that where people could get hurt, or their property could get hurt, or there's a threat that a person or their property could get hurt. I mean, that can't be that many crimes, can it?
Richard.
We are the Armed Attorneys. Today we're answering a question we received in the comment section. We've talked to some folks about this mandatory minimum punishment if you use an NFA item, think suppressor, think short-barreled rifle, even machine gun. Does this mean this is not a good option for self-defense because the penalties, if things go awry, are so out of control? That's what we're talking about. But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button and check your subscription status. We got to do this periodically. YouTube likes to monkey around with things. Just make sure if you are a subscriber, you are still subscribed. But I've had a bunch of people ask about this mandatory minimum 30-year suppressor self-defense firearm. There are things amiss.
Yeah. Oh,
to quote a famous prosecutor.
To quote a prosecutor who tried to prosecute a ridiculous charge against a client of mine years ago. Yes, something is amiss. So we have lots of questions coming in about. So I think we should address. Do we address the law first, and then the practicalities, and then what the armed attorneys do?
Yes,
is that our order of events?
I think that's a good order of events.
So we have questions about this law, which is, hey, are there extra years tacked on just because you have an NFA item? And you would say to yourself, well, that's stupid because I have jumped through my hoops. It's a lawfully owned item, right? So that's caveat, right? We're not talking about something that you're not allowed to have or for which, you have transferred without a tax stamp or something, bad ideas like that. We were talking about your legally owned NFA item.
Yeah, this is different than the general 10-year, $10,000 fine penalty.
Correct. So I will say, I don't know, I'm not saying they're not out there. I don't know of a state law that does this to you. I don't know of a state law that tacks on extra time because of a lawfully owned item. Do you?
No, I'm not familiar with one.
And you might live in a state.
Yeah.
Just let us know.
Let's see if there's a fact check on that. Let us know in the comment section below if you run into this. But it raises an interesting question because, all right, we're not talking about state law here. We're talking about federal law. And federal law has some extremely punitive sections when it comes to NFA items used in crimes of violence.
Yes, they do. And you would say to yourself, what is a federal crime of violence? Why, given the founders and the framers of our great nation and their fears of a domineering federal government, why in the world would we have a federal statute that criminalizes murder or violent crime? Because that's not what the intent was for the country. And then you might sit there and get an ulcer because you get mad about what's happening to the world today. But there's a federal crime of violence. There's a federal drug trafficking crime that actually enhances when you use a suppressor, a machine gun, a short barrel rifle, a short barrel shotgun. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, so I think we start with our, all right, we agree. We don't think that the federal government should have general police power. We'll put that on the sidebar for just a moment.
Do we sidebar it?
Emily is not sidebarring it.
Just blink it up above my head in the slide the whole time for the rest of the video.
But we look at the definition of what is considered a crime of violence, and it is extremely broad. So this is 18 U.S.C. Section 16. A crime of violence is defined as an offense that involves the use or attempted use of physical force against another person or their property, or a felony offense that poses a substantial risk that physical force may be used during its commission.
I can't put it aside. I can't put aside that it is a crime in your state against someone else in your state that in no way invokes anything the federal government should touch, and yet it's a federal crime.
No, it's just, it's just crimes that where people could get hurt, or their property could get hurt, or there's a threat that a person or their property could get hurt. That can't be that many crimes, can it?
Richard. All right, moving on. So, yes, so you've done that. You have committed a crime of violence. This also applies to drug trafficking crimes, as I mentioned earlier. But for our self-defenders, crime of violence, using self-defense against someone who has attacked you, broken into your house, attacked your family, crime of violence, Richard?
Yes, but, and I know people are going to say, hold on, that's self-defense. Well, self-defense, affirmative defense. You're not saying I didn't assault this person, shoot this person, kill this person.
You're not saying I didn't crime in the violence.
Yes, you're saying I crimed in the violence and I had a really good reason.
Right, correct.
So, but yeah, all right, so we have a crime of violence. It happens to be a federal crime of violence. Where do we find this enhancement? What does it say?
We find it in 18 U.S.C. 924. And what it says, and I'm just going to read the whole thing. It's long, but it's worth it. We'll flash it up on screen so you're not super bored just hearing it. Except to the extent that a greater minimum sentence is otherwise provided by this subsection or any other provision of law, any person who, during and in relation to any crime of violence or drug trafficking crime, including a crime of violence or drug trafficking crime that provides for an enhanced punishment if committed by the use of a deadly or dangerous weapon or device, for which the person may be prosecuted in a court of the United States, uses or carries a firearm, or who, in furtherance of any such crime, possesses a firearm, shall, in addition to the punishment provided for such crime of violence or drug trafficking crime, B, if the firearms possessed by a person convicted of a violation of this subsection is a short barrel rifle, short barrel shotgun, semi-automatic assault weapon, the person shall be sentenced to a term of imprisonment not less than 10 years, or is a machine gun, a destructive device, or is equipped with a firearm silencer or firearm muffler, the person shall be sentenced to a term of imprisonment of not less than 30 years. 30 years, Richard.
Yeah, so short barrel rifle, shotgun, looking at the 10, machine guns,
and suppressors,
yeah. Machine guns and destructive devices, suppressors, 30 years.
30 years. Incredible. Incredible. So, there is the law. And yet,
yeah,
why...
that's 18 U.S.C. 924 C1A.
Thank you. So, why don't we talk about this law, though? I think that's the important... That's why you're here, right?
Yes.
You could look
All right,
up this
we
law
built up
in the
the panic,
black
the
and white.
suspense, the, oh my gosh, I should never carry a suppressor as a self-defense instrument.
Right. So,
now it's time to come back down to planet Earth.
Yeah. So, practically speaking, I'm not saying that I've been doing this forever. Certainly would never disclose my age on this channel, but in 12 years of practice, I have never, ever, ever, ever seen this prosecuted. And I have seen NFA items in the course of self-defense crimes. Have you ever seen this prosecuted?
Not in self-defense, maybe because, I cruise through a bunch of cases, gun cases. I see it with drug trafficking crimes.
Sure, that's fine. But just the idea that it's out there, I understand, is distressing. But practically speaking, I mean, I'll give you an example. Someone I talked to just last week, actually, very nice gentleman, who was highly concerned that he realized that he had like marijuana edibles that he had gotten in California, and he's a Texan now, and he still had them in his home, and he has firearms now, and he was like, the federal government's going to come into my house, and they're going to search it, and they're going to find my edibles, and then I'm going to have my gun rights taken away. I'm going to be, and it was like, well, I mean, by the letter of the law, you shouldn't have those edibles. You shouldn't be a habitual user of marijuana.
Still a crime in Texas.
Still a crime federally, right? Habitual user, you got your... But for the love of God, the federal government is not like... You are a professional. The federal government is not entering your home to go, like, check your nightstand to see if your gummies are there, right? So just practically speaking versus the letter of the law, you just don't see it. You don't see it.
Yeah.
You don't see this.
And as far as, like, federal murder charges, those are pretty rare. I mean, you don't see that come up very frequently at all. And that's because the state governments, they're doing the legwork on all of this. And except in extreme cases, and we were talking about this earlier, think Derek Chauvin, if he would have been acquitted of murder, is my understanding it was the full intent of the federal government to charge him with murder on the federal level and try him again. Is that double jeopardy? No. Two different sovereign jurisdictions. They can charge you for the same crime. So, I mean, except in extreme circumstances, we just don't see that happen.
Correct. So now I think we get to our last kind of segment here, which is ask the armed attorneys, do we want you, is it a good idea or not to attach, let's go with suppressor, because that's really kind of the majority of the questions we've gotten, right?
Yep.
To attach a suppressor to a firearm, which you believe could be your defensive firearm, whether it be in your home, in your vehicle. I mean, we're going to have a really hard time EDCing your suppressed firearm, but there are ones that are defensive firearms where you could in fact keep a suppressor attached. And I have two answers to this.
I kind of have two answers too. We hadn't talked about this.
Yeah, we haven't talked about this.
I want to hear your two answers.
As the lawyer who is defending your murder charge in court, I'd rather not. I'd rather you not have a suppressor attached, just because I know that it should in fact be an OSHA requirement that it be attached.
It's the polite thing to do.
It is the polite thing to do. It's like covering your burps in public.
Sure.
So the prosecutor is going to melt down, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to say that they're going to make allusions to hitmen and the mob and all kinds of things. Yes, it is a issue at trial. I will give you that.
Yeah, so I really don't. Just as your lawyer,
you're just lazy.
So, I mean, yes, as your lawyer, I'd rather you not. It's going to add a complicating factor, a stupid complicating factor, one that should never be complicating to begin with.
Totally explainable.
Totally explainable. But really, I mean, honestly, the prosecution is going to like melt down, be delighted, want to splash it all up in front of everything. It's probably going to cause higher plea bargain offers. It's going to push it along to trial when maybe it shouldn't. I mean, there's all sorts of things. Now, with that said, and with the knowledge that, in fact, it is a federal crime if you crime of violence with your suppressor attached, does the pistol in my husband's nightstand have a suppressor attached? Yes, it does. I don't want him to wake my children if someone breaks into our home.
Sure.
You shoot those.
Nap time is sacred.
You shoot those burglars quietly.
Sure.
Daddy, kids are sleeping.
Well,
so I guess like I don't really follow my own advice, I guess, but
I'll say, all right, so I'm of two thoughts where I still think it's a performance enhancing modification, and our general thing on that is, hey, if it makes you more lethal, makes you more on target, if it's going to keep you more safe.
You're going to be able to talk to the police in 911 a little better if you can hear after your self-defense incident.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. All right, I tend to say, hey, this is an issue. Who knows how big this speed bump is going to be at trial. It is going to be an issue at trial, but I think there's a way to talk about a lot of these issues. Is that more expensive for the self-defender because they have to shell out an expert to come in and talk about why folks have suppressors? Maybe, because unlike most modifications or ammunition choice or things like that, we can elicit most of that stuff from the police, whereas this might be a unique enough issue where the jury needs help understanding it. So, all right, maybe there's a little bit of practical thing there. And then I would just say environment matters when it comes to this. If you are out generally in public, I'll just say, not saying this is the way I want the world to be, but I'll say it's pretty unusual to see someone every day carrying with a suppressor on.
Yeah.
And so if you find yourself in a self-defense situation out in public, I think that looks very different than nightstand gun.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a gun gal, right? I mean, not only do I practice this kind of law, if anything ever happened in our home and our home were searched, when they like search someone's home and they report finding an arsenal, like that'd be me. I'd be the arsenal gal, right? So even if I saw you, which you'd have to openly carry, if I saw you openly carrying your handgun with a suppressor attached, just walking around in public, I'd roll my eyes so hard. And as the gun person,
save some Second Amendment for the rest of us. But there's a lot going on here, but we hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And please question and comment for us below. What do you think? Good idea, bad idea? Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.